you ever been to your local home improvement store to buy paint? Well, recently, I was there to buy white paint. And when I went in, I thought I would just go in, ask for white, and leave. But what I found was this. Many kinds of white paint, many different kinds of white. I had no idea that I would expect to find several colors. In choosing paint, I started to look at the colors, and as you might be able to tell, some of those colors are more brown, some of them more grayish. One looked a little purple to me. So in choosing my color, I decided to look at the names that they had given to the paint chips. Some of them were snowcap white and bistro white and quail egg white. And I wondered how my choosing white paint was determined by the name that it was given, because some of them I liked and some of them I didn't. Does our language affect how we see the world? Does our language affect how I pick white paint? I think it does. Long ago, there was a researcher and anthropologist by the name of Sapir, and he merged some of his studies with a young linguist by the name of Whorf. Together, they came up with what we now know as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. I believe that the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis explains some of our interpersonal miscommunication. According to Corey Floyd, in his most recent interpersonal communication textbook, he defines the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis as this: language influences the ways that members of a culture see the world. Our language influences the ways that we in a culture see the world. Now, there are two pieces to the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, and one sort of unfolds from the other. The first one is called linguistic determinism. I know, it's a huge term. Linguistic determinism. Linguistic determinism is the structure of a language determining how we think. So in essence, our language tells us what to think. Let's think about this in the most easy way. In English, here in America, our language revolves around past, present, and future. And we sort of see the world in past, present, and future. There are languages, for instance, that don't have a future tense. And the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, particularly the determinist view, says that they don't see the world the same way we do, because we have past, present, and future, and they maybe only have past and present. That our language determines how we think. Our language determines how we see the world. Let's go across the world to the Solomon Islands. In the Solomon Islands, there is a culture there which revolves around coconut. It's a high commodity there, coconut. And in the Solomon Islands, they have 9 words for coconut. Actually, they have 9 words which represent each of the stages of growth of a coconut, which they use for particular purposes. In America, we have 1 word for coconut. A coconut is not that highly valued in our society. Linguistic determinism says that my language will determine how I think about it. So in the Solomon Islands, they probably think more importantly, for instance, about coconut than we do in America. Makes sense. The second principle in the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is called linguistic relativism. Because language determines our perceptions of reality, how we see the world, linguistic relativism says people who speak different languages will see the world differently. People who speak different languages will see the world differently. So let's take, for example, this Mandarin culture. There's a word in their society called Lao, L-A-O, and it means respect for the elderly. Now in America, we have the word respect, and we have the word elderly, and we have this concept that we should respect our elders. But in the Mandarin culture, they have a whole word for it. Linguistic relativism says that because they have a word, they will think about it differently than we do when we don't have a word. That different cultures with different languages think differently about a concept, in this case, respect for the elderly. There are even some Sapir-Whorf believers who say because they have a word, they respect their elders better than we can because we don't have the word. Now, let me muddy this topic a little bit more. I think it's already heavy and sort of hard to understand by asking you this. Is it that they respect their elders because the word exists in their language? Or does the word exist in their language because they have such respect for their elders? Sort of a chicken or egg theory, and interesting, I think, to think about in terms of our language. Let me give you another example of the linguistic relativism. In the Philippines, they have 92 words for rice. They eat, breathe, live, and sleep rice. Unlike here in America, we basically have one word for rice. We have lots of adjectives to describe it. We have white rice and brown rice and basmati rice, but we don't have 92 words for rice. Linguistic relativism says that they may, in fact, have more importance on rice because they have so many words for it. Whereas in America, it's not so important. Different languages see the world differently. Do those in the Philippines see rice differently than we do? I think they probably do. Several years ago, I traveled to Cameroon, West Africa. And while I was there, I had the privilege of spending a day with a linguist. And he was telling me about some of his work, and his job was to translate the Bible into the mother tongue, the language of those in a tribe in a very remote area. He said to me that one of the biggest challenges is finding words that matter to these folks. For instance, there's a passage in Scripture that says, whiter than snow. And he said to me, these folks in Cameroon, they've never seen snow. They don't experience snow. They don't have televisions to know what snow is. They have very few books and even fewer magazines. So his job was to find something in their culture that meant something similar to ours, whiter than snow. Can they not understand the concept if they don't have the word snow in it? A Sapir-Whorf believer says no, they cannot understand snow unless they have the word, the way that we do. There are those who aren't such heavy believers in Sapir-Whorf, and they say, we can still make some words, we can still translate something so that people understand. And that's what this linguist believed. He said, for instance, he might have to choose a phrase like whiter than goat's milk, something that they're very familiar with, so they can understand the concept. So, my last question for you is, who cares? Why do we need to even know about the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis? Well, let's think about it. If language does affect how we think, and thinking is our perception, so language affects how we see the world, what our perception of our experience is, what our perception of words that we're hearing, what is our perception? Hasn't it ever happened where you've had a miscommunication with someone you love, your family, your friends, your coworkers, maybe even strangers? Is it possible that that miscommunication is hung up on a difference in perception, which may stem from a difference in language? And it may mean that their language is different because they live in a different part of town. Their language is different because they live in a different part of the country. Or maybe they live in a different country. Or maybe they grew up in a different part of the country. The more diverse our perceptions, the less able we are to have a mutual understanding with each other, which then affects our interpersonal communication. Now let me muddy this water a little bit. What if someone knows 2 languages, or 3 or 4 languages? Wouldn't it stand to reason that the more languages you know, the wider your perception is of life, of experiencing the world? And there again, isn't it possible that we will interact with people, and we probably already do, who know 2 languages, or 3 or 4, and have a very wide perception? Does Sapir-Whorf affect us?